In this lesson, we're going to focus on one objective: how to set up a basic pivot table. And as you'll see, it's really not too hard because we've already begun to do this. I should let you know that the pivot tables in Sheets are really not as powerful or have as many functions as the pivot tables in Excel, but they're still very powerful. So let's dive into our sheet and see what this is all about. We've been working with the data from Google Search Console that we got into Sheets from the Search Analytics for Sheets plugin. I've cleaned this up a little bit, but what we're going to do is recreate this table. To start off, you want to have your cursor in the mass of data that we downloaded. It's really important to know that all the data you're about to put into the pivot table has to be contiguous. There can't be any empty columns or empty rows. In addition, the data has to have headers. Once those conditions are met, click on Data, click on Pivot Table. Sheets will show you the contiguous data that you're in, and you're going to put that into a new sheet and create. You are now in the Pivot Table sheet. There's a Pivot Table editor, which will let you add the rows and columns and values that we're about to do. And you have your section for the pivot table. If you click outside of that, the Pivot Table editor disappears. If you click back into it, the Pivot Table editor is there. Notice that there are some suggested pivot tables already. I find them to not be all that useful, but they may be exactly what you're looking for at that point in time. Let's start by building the rows that we want, which are the countries. If we add a row, you'll see the list of options that are available. Those are the same thing as the headers in our original table. We're going to add country, and we now have a list of all the countries. We don't want all of them. We're going to add a filter right away. And we're going to just look for Australia, Great Britain, and the US. And there's our list of countries, and we can change the order in which they appear to be descending. So now they match what we have in our table over here: USA, Great Britain, Australia. Next, let's add the device categories. We'll do that in the columns in this case. Now we have desktop, mobile, and tablet. And then finally, let's add the values of what we're looking for. Let's add the impressions. We have now built a table that replicates what we built over here with the SUMIFs command. And we did it pretty darn quickly, so this is pretty impressive. One of the great advantages of a pivot table is that you can move things around. If we wanted to have devices in the rows, for example, we now have them broken out by country, by device, and we can click on the groups to collapse them. Unfortunately, there's no quick way to expand or collapse all these fields. If we added in another row, such as date, you'll notice that the device rows now have the ability to open and shut as well. Each time you add a level, another row, you add the ability to expand or contract the prior row. Let's get rid of everything we've done in this pivot table so far and start afresh with a different view of the data. Since the data we pulled is from Google Search Console, let's look at the specific pages and the queries that drove traffic to them. Our rows are going to be the page and the query. And now we're going to fill in the values. We're going to add in clicks and impressions. It's a little bit hard to read the page and query columns, so let's highlight both of those by pressing Shift, and let's make them both a little bit bigger. Great, now we can read it. Let's round this out by adding our device type And there's actually two different places we could put it. Typically, it's going to be considered a row because it's text, but we could also add it as a column because there aren't that many of them. So now we have desktop with the clicks and the impressions, mobile with the clicks and the impressions, and tablet with the clicks and the impressions. We can see that this query, Westwoods, showed up as an impression on both the desktop and the mobile environment. Using the pivot table, we're really beginning to get some good information out of our data. These are all the queries that drove traffic to the home page. We can see how it's broken out by device type, and the most popular one by far is Westwoods. When we click outside of the pivot table, our table editor disappears. If we click back inside, it reappears. We can always close it and bring it back. Because it's a pivot table, it's easy to move the elements around. We could move the device up, for example, if we wanted to, have that be the very first thing. And we can keep playing with the format until everything is in the order that we want. The pivot tables are very powerful, and it's so easy to move things around and get them exactly how you want it, which is probably not the way we have it set up right now, but I think you'll get the point. Recapping our lesson, we learned how to set up a basic pivot table, which involved assigning fields to rows, columns, or values. We learned how to filter a field and how to move the fields between the different options. Our resources for this lesson include the sheet that I was working in. Always remember to make your own sheet and work with your own data so it'll be more meaningful. And of course, replicate, experiment, and extend everything that I did, particularly with the pivot tables. But we'll go into more detail in the next lesson on some other features of the pivot table that make it even more valuable.